The crystal champagne flute shattered against the wall behind me, missing my head by inches. The room fell silent, except for my mother's ragged breathing. Even in her designer dress and perfectly coiffed hair, she looked unhinged, a stark contrast to the elegant corporate party surrounding us. I'm Willow, and this was supposed to be my moment. My promotion to the executive board at age 32 should have been cause for celebration, not another battlefield with my mother. Engineering? She spat the word like poison. I didn't raise you to waste your life playing with machines. You were meant for greater things, Willow. Law school, remember? The entire executive floor of Palmer Technologies watched in horrified fascination. My colleague Zoe stepped forward, but I raised my hand slightly, stopping her. This was my fight. Mother, you're embarrassing yourself, I said, keeping my voice steady. Security will escort you out if necessary. She laughed, that hollow, cruel sound I'd grown up hearing. Security? In case you've forgotten, I paid for your education. Everything you are today is because of my own hard work, I cut in. The scholarship paid for my education. You know that. Dylan, my boyfriend, appeared at my side, his artist's hands gentle on my shoulder. Mrs. Bryant, I think it's time for you to leave. And who are you to tell me what to do? She sneered. Another disappointment my daughter surrounds herself with. Edwin, my mentor and the closest thing to a real parent I'd ever had, stepped forward. Tiffany, enough. You're making a scene. The party had completely derailed now. Milena from HR was already on her phone, presumably calling security. But before anyone could act, the room's attention shifted to the entrance as our CEO, Mr. Richardson, walked in with an unfamiliar man. Ladies and gentlemen, Richardson announced, I have an important announcement. As of next month, I'll be stepping down as CEO. I'd like to introduce my successor, Dominic Paul. The champagne glass I was holding slipped from my fingers, crashing to the floor. The new CEO, my father, who I hadn't seen in 20 years, locked eyes with me across the room. My mother's face went chalk white. No, she whispered. No, no, no. I felt the room spinning. Dylan's grip on my shoulder tightened, grounding me. Zoe appeared on my other side, whispering, Breathe, Will, just breathe. Dominic Paul, the man whose name my mother had forbidden in our house, the man she'd told me abandoned us for his career, the man whose child support checks, I'd later discovered, she'd returned unopened for years. He looked older than in the faded photograph I kept hidden in my desk drawer, but his eyes, my eyes, were the same deep brown. He started walking toward me, but my mother intercepted him. You have no right, she hissed. No right to be here. I have every right, Tiffany, he replied calmly. This is my company now, and that's my daughter you were just berating. The silence in the room was deafening. I straightened my spine, years of engineering presentations kicking in. Mr. Paul, I said formally, welcome to Palmer Technologies. His face showed a flicker of pain at my formal tone, but he nodded. Thank you, Willow. I look forward to working with our newest board member. My mother's laugh was borderline hysterical. Oh, I see how it is. You orchestrated this whole thing, didn't you? Getting your precious daughter on the board just before taking over. Actually, Edwin stepped in, Willow earned her position months before Mr. Paul was even considered for CEO. Her work on the Sustainable Energy Project saved the company millions. I watched my mother's face contort as her narrative crumbled. She'd spent years telling me I'd never succeed in engineering, that I was throwing my life away. Now here I stood, the youngest board member in the company's history, face to face with the father she'd tried to erase. This isn't over, she snapped, grabbing her purse. Don't think for a moment this changes anything. As she stormed out, I felt something shift inside me. The scared little girl who'd always sought her approval faded away, replaced by something stronger. I apologize for the disruption, I addressed the room. Please enjoy the rest of the evening. The party gradually resumed, though I could feel the curious glances and whispered conversations. Dylan squeezed my hand. You okay? I wasn't okay. My carefully constructed world had just imploded. but I was still standing. Willow, my father, no, Mr. Paul, said quietly. We should talk. I looked at him. This stranger who shared my DNA, this man who was now my boss. Yes, I replied. We should, but not tonight. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. As he walked away, Zoe handed me a fresh glass of champagne. Well, she said, at least no one can say your promotion party was boring. Despite everything, I laughed. She was right. This was just the beginning. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to face whatever came next. No more hiding, no more seeking approval. It was time to write my own story. The coffee shop was quiet for a Tuesday afternoon. I'd chosen it specifically because it was 3 blocks from the office, far enough that my mother wouldn't think to look for me here. After a week of dodging her calls and focusing on work, I'd finally agreed to meet my father. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups. I remembered you liked caramel macchiatos, he said as I sat down. At least you did when you were 12. I still do, I replied, surprised he remembered such a detail, though these days I usually need something stronger. Like the whiskey you keep in your office drawer. When I raised my eyebrows, he smiled. I did my homework before taking the CEO position. Your project files are impressive. Is that why you're here? I asked, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. To discuss work? He sighed, pulling an old leather briefcase onto his lap. No, I'm here because I owe you 20 years of explanations. Mother said you left us for your career, that you chose success over family. Is that what Tiffany told you? He pulled out a stack of envelopes, all unopened, all addressed to me. These are just some of the letters I sent, birthday cards, Christmas cards, graduation congratulations, all returned unopened. My hands shook as I picked up the top envelope, my 13th birthday card, marked Return to Sender in my mother's distinctive handwriting. I never stopped trying to reach you, Willow. Your mother made sure I couldn't. She said you stopped paying child support. He pulled out another folder. Bank statements, every month without fail. She returned those checks too, but I kept depositing them into a separate account. For you. My coffee sat untouched, growing cold. Why are you showing me this now? Because you're old enough to handle the truth, and because I watched you stand up to her at that party. You're stronger than you know, Willow. Stronger because I had to be, I shot back. Do you know what it's like growing up with her? Everything I did was wrong. Every choice I made was a disappointment. I know, he said quietly. I married her, remember? That's why I fought so hard for custody. That stopped me cold. You what? Your mother didn't tell you about the custody battle? I spent 2 years and every penny I had trying to get custody of you. She convinced the judge I was an unfit parent because I worked too much. The irony wasn't lost on me. While she spent every day telling me I worked too much, she's always been good at twisting things to fit her narrative. He pulled out one final envelope, this one new. This contains everything: court documents, letters, photos, things you should have seen years ago. I stared at the envelope but didn't take it. Why didn't you try harder? Why didn't you just show up at my school, my graduation? I did. His voice cracked. Your mother had a restraining order, said I was harassing her. The one time I got close enough to talk to you, at your high school graduation, she had me arrested. The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. The crazy man security had tackled during the ceremony. I'd barely glimpsed him. I watched from a distance, he continued. Saw you graduate college. Saw your first patent announcement. I kept every newspaper clipping about your achievements. Stop, I whispered. Just stop. My head was spinning with revelations, each one rewriting my childhood memories. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, Willow, or to turn you against your mother. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth. The truth? I laughed bitterly. The truth is, you're my boss now. How do I know this isn't some corporate manipulation? Because I turned down this job twice before accepting it, he replied. I only said yes when they mentioned you were on the board. It was my chance to finally be in your life again. My phone buzzed. Another message from my mother. I turned it face down without reading it. "Take the envelope," he said gently. "Read it when you're ready, or don't. It's your choice now. But know this, I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped being proud of you." I reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. "I need time." "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere this time." He stood up, then hesitated. "One more thing. That sustainable energy project you're leading, it's brilliant. And it's all you, not your mother's influence, not my genes. Just you." As he walked away, I sat there holding the envelope that contained my real childhood, not the version I'd been fed. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked at it. "Mother, we need to talk about your father's lies. Come home now." I typed back a response I'd waited 20 years to send. "No." Then I picked up the envelope and walked out, leaving both my cold coffee and my mother's demands behind. It was time to discover who I really was, beyond the lies and manipulation. And for once, I wasn't afraid of what I might find. "The projections don't lie, Willow," Zoe said, pointing at my computer screen. "The sustainable energy project is falling behind schedule." I rubbed my temples, fighting a headache. 3 days had passed since meeting my father, and the envelope still sat unopened in my desk drawer, taunting me. "We need to recalculate the power-output ratios. Something's off in the baseline measurements." "You've been distracted," she said gently. "Maybe we should—" The door burst open, and my mother strode in like she owned the place. How she'd gotten past security, I couldn't imagine. 3 days of ignored calls," she announced. "Is this how you treat your mother?" Zoe straightened. "I'll give you two some privacy." "No," I said firmly. "Stay. We have work to do, and Mother was just leaving." "Leaving?" She laughed that familiar, cutting laugh. "I drove 2 hours to get here. We need to discuss your father's ridiculous claims." "Claims?" I pulled open my drawer and took out the envelope. "You mean these court documents? The restraining order? The returned letters?" Her face paled slightly. "He showed you those? Typical Dominic, trying to poison you against me." "The only poison here came from you," I said, standing up. 20 years of lies, Mother. 20 years of making me believe I wasn't good enough. Everything I did was to protect you." She slammed her hand on my desk. "He would have ruined you like he ruined me." "Mrs. Bryant," Zoe interjected, "this is a place of business. If you can't lower your voice—" "Stay out of this," my mother snapped. "This is family business." I walked to my wall, where my engineering degree hung proudly. "You see this, Mother? The degree you said would lead nowhere. The career you said was beneath me." I took it down and held it out to her. "This is who I am. Not the lawyer you wanted, not the socialite you tried to create. Me. I gave you everything," she hissed. "Every advantage, every opportunity." "You gave me trauma," I cut in. "You gave me self-doubt. You gave me years of therapy bills." A knock at the door interrupted us. Milena from HR stood there, security guards flanking her. "Is everything all right? We heard shouting." "Everything's fine," I said calmly. "My mother was just leaving." "Like hell I am. You ungrateful—" The security guard stepped forward, but I held up my hand. "Mother, you have two choices. Leave voluntarily, or be escorted out and banned from the building. Your decision." She stared at me, and for the first time, I saw something new in her eyes. Fear. Not of the security guards, but of me, of the power I'd found. "You sound just like him," she whispered. "No," I replied. "I sound like me. The me you tried to suppress for 20 years. She grabbed her purse, hands shaking. "This isn't over, Willow. You need me. You've always needed me. The only thing I need is for you to leave." After she stormed out, Milena approached my desk. "Do you want to press charges for trespassing?" I shook my head. "Just make sure she's on the restricted access list." "Already done." Milena smiled sympathetically. "Your father asked me to give you this, by the way." She handed me a file. "It's the original patent for the Sustainable Energy Project. He thought it might help with your calculations." I opened the file, scanning the technical drawings. There, in the margins, were handwritten notes addressing exactly the power output issues we'd been struggling with. "He's been following my work," I murmured. "For years, apparently," Milena replied. "He has quite a collection of your publications in his office." After everyone left, Zoe stayed behind. "You okay?" I looked at the degree still in my hands, then at the patent file my father had sent. "You know what? I actually am. For the first time in my life, I feel clear." "What are you going to do about your mother?" I hung the degree back on my wall, straightening it carefully. "Nothing. She made her choices. Now I'm making mine." "And the envelope?" Zoe nodded toward my drawer. "I think it's time to read it." I pulled it out and broke the seal. "Want to grab dinner and help me through this?" "Only if you're buying," she grinned. "And only if you let me call Dylan to join us. He's been worried about you." I gathered my things, including both the envelope and my father's patent file. "Deal. But first, let's fix these calculations. I have a project to save and a point to prove." "To your mother?" "No," I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "To myself." As we dove back into the technical problems, I realized something profound. My mother's dramatic entrance hadn't shaken me like it used to. Her words didn't cut as deep. The little girl desperate for approval was gone, replaced by a woman who finally understood her own worth. The real work, both with the project and my family drama, was just beginning. But for the first time, I was ready to face it all head-on, without fear or doubt. After all, I was an engineer. Solving complex problems was what I did best. Dylan's small art studio provided the perfect sanctuary for reading my father's letter. The smell of paint and canvas somehow made everything feel less intense. Zoe sat cross-legged on the worn leather couch while Dylan worked quietly at his easel, occasionally glancing over with concern. "You don't have to do this tonight," Zoe said softly. "Yes, I do." I pulled out the first document, a yellowed letter dated 20 years ago. "Dear Willow," I read aloud, my voice shaking. "I'm writing this letter, knowing your mother will probably never let you read it. Today, the judge granted her full custody, despite everything I tried to prove." Dylan set down his paintbrush. "Do you want me to read it?" I handed him the letter, unable to continue. He cleared his throat and began reading. "The judge believed your mother's claims that my work schedule made me an unfit parent. What they didn't see were the times I changed my entire career path trying to get more time with you. The consulting job I took so I could work from home. The promotions I turned down that would have required travel." Zoe squeezed my hand as Dylan continued. "Your mother told the court I was obsessed with my career, that I chose work over family. The truth is, I chose every job based on how it would affect my time with you. But she had a way of twisting everything I did into something sinister." The next document was a bank statement, 20 years of child support payments, each one returned uncashed. Below that, statements from a separate account, my account, growing steadily with each deposit he'd made anyway. "There's enough here to buy a house," I whispered, staring at the final balance. "Keep reading," Zoe urged gently. The next papers were newspaper clippings. My high school robotics competition win, my college graduation, my first patent announcement, each one carefully preserved, some with coffee stains suggesting they'd been read multiple times. Then came the photos. Me at 12, playing with a science kit, taken from a distance. Me at 16, receiving an award, shot from the back of the auditorium. Me at 21 in my graduation gown, photographed through a car window. "He was there," I said, my voice breaking. "He was always there." "Look at this one," Dylan said, pulling out a newspaper clipping. It showed me giving a presentation at an engineering conference 3 years ago. In the background, barely visible, was my father, sitting in the last row. My phone rang, making us all jump. My mother's name flashed on the screen. "Don't answer it," Zoe warned. But I did, putting it on speaker. "What do you want, Mother?" "I just left your father's office," she said, her voice unsteady. "He showed me everything, Willow. Everything." "And?" And I made mistakes, but you have to understand. Understand what? I interrupted. That you deliberately kept me from my father. That you returned every letter, every gift, every attempt he made to be in my life. I was protecting you. From what? I demanded. From having a father who loved me, from knowing that someone believed in my choices. He would have turned you against me, she said, her voice small. Like he's doing now. No, Mother, you did that all on your own. I looked at the photos spread across Dylan's studio floor. Every time you told me I wasn't good enough, every time you dismissed my achievements, every time you tried to force me to be someone I'm not. Please, she whispered, please don't do this. Do what? Tell the truth? That's rich coming from you. Dylan moved to my side, his hand warm on my shoulder. I drew strength from his presence. I'm not the villain here, my mother protested. Everything I did was for you, I finished. It was always for you. Your reputation, your plans, your control. Never for me. The line went quiet for a long moment. Then, what do you want from me, Willow? Nothing, I replied. For the first time in my life, I want absolutely nothing from you. I ended the call and let the phone drop onto the scattered papers. Zoe immediately pulled me into a hug, while Dylan wrapped his arms around us both. You did good, kid, Zoe murmured. Look, Dylan said suddenly, turning his easel toward us. He'd been painting while I read, a portrait of me surrounded by scattered letters and photos, but with light breaking through the chaos. Somehow he'd captured exactly how I felt. Broken but healing, lost but finding my way. It's perfect, I whispered. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. I hope you found what you needed in those papers. My door is always open when you're ready. I looked at the painting, at my friends, at the evidence of a father's love scattered around us. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe fully, like a weight I'd carried so long I'd forgotten it was there had finally lifted. I think, I said slowly, I'm ready now. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes, Zoe announced, poking her head into my office. You ready for this? I adjusted my blazer, checking my reflection in the window. Ready as I'll ever be. The past week had been a whirlwind of preparation. The Sustainable Energy Project was back on track, thanks to my father's notes, and countless late nights with Zoe. Now we had to present our progress to the board. Hold up, Zoe said, stepping into my office. Your mother's in the lobby again. My stomach clenched. Milena banned her. She's claiming medical emergency, says she needs to see you immediately. Of course she does. I grabbed my presentation materials. Tell security to escort her out. I'm done with her emergencies. We headed toward the boardroom, but Milena intercepted us in the hallway. Willow, got a minute? The meeting. Can wait 5 minutes. Your father already knows we'll be slightly delayed. She pulled me into a nearby conference room, Zoe following. What's going on? Milena's face was serious. Your mother's been calling board members, trying to convince them you're emotionally unstable and unfit for your position. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Seriously, that's her play. She's desperate, Zoe said. You took away her control, so she's trying to hurt you the only way she can. Unfortunately, Milena continued, one board member seems sympathetic to her. Marcus is questioning whether family drama might affect your judgment. Marcus? I shook my head. He's been against me since day one. This just gives him an excuse. Which is why we need to handle this carefully, Milena said. Your presentation today needs to be flawless. My phone buzzed. A text from Dylan. Your mother just showed up at my studio. Says she has proof you're having a breakdown. She's everywhere, I muttered, showing them the message. No, Zoe said firmly. She's nowhere. She's just making noise because she's losing. Focus on what matters. The project, the presentation, your future. A knock at the door made us all turn. My father stood there, looking concerned. Everything okay? The board's waiting. I straightened my shoulders. Everything's fine, just dealing with some last-minute complications. Your mother? he asked knowingly. She's trying to convince the board I'm unstable, I said, watching his reaction. His face darkened. She used the same tactics during our custody battle. Claimed I was mentally unfit because I kept fighting for you. He stepped into the room, closing the door. But we're not going to let her win this time. We? I asked. Yes, we. Milena's documented every attempt your mother's made to interfere with company business. Zoe has records of your project's progress and your leadership. And he smiled slightly. I have 20 years of evidence showing exactly who the unstable one is. The board meeting, I started. Can wait 10 more minutes, he said. Right now, we're going to plan how to handle this properly. For the next few minutes, we strategized. Milena would present the documentation of my mother's harassment. Zoe would handle the technical presentation, demonstrating my clear-headed leadership. And I would... Just be yourself, my father said. Show them the brilliant, composed engineer I've watched from afar all these years. When we finally entered the boardroom, Marcus immediately spoke up. This delay is unprofessional. Actually, Milena cut in smoothly, we were just reviewing some concerning attempts to interfere with company operations. She began distributing folders to each board member. I took my place at the front of the room, Zoe beside me with our presentation materials. As the board members opened their folders, their expressions shifted from annoyance to concern. These allegations, Marcus began, but my father cut him off, are fully documented and verified. Now, shall we proceed with the project update? For the next hour, Zoe and I presented our findings. The power output issues had been resolved, the timeline was back on track, and our projected savings had actually increased. I answered every question with confidence, my voice never wavering. As we concluded, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Dylan. Your mother's gone, but she left something you should see. Come by the studio after work. Any other questions? I asked the board, ignoring the message for now. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. I may have been hasty in my concerns about your stability. Thank you, Marcus, I replied professionally. I understand how family drama might appear to affect one's judgment. Fortunately, I learned long ago to separate personal issues from professional responsibilities. After the meeting, my father caught up with me in the hallway. That was impressive. I had good help, I said, glancing at Zoe and Milena, who were chatting nearby. No, he shook his head. That was all you. You're stronger than she ever gave you credit for, stronger than I even imagined. My phone buzzed again. Dylan. It's important. Trust me. Excuse me, I said to my father. I need to go see what new drama my mother's created. He touched my arm gently. Whatever it is, remember, you're not alone this time. I nodded, feeling oddly peaceful despite the chaos. My mother might be everywhere, but for the first time, I had people in my corner. Real people who supported me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. Dylan's studio was filled with the golden light of sunset when I arrived. He was standing in front of a large canvas, but it wasn't his usual artwork that caught my attention. It was the old shoebox sitting on his work table. Your mother dropped this off, he said quietly. Said it was time you saw the whole truth. I approached the box cautiously, as if it might bite. Did you look inside? No, but... He hesitated. She was crying, Will. Real tears, not her usual dramatic performance. I lifted the lid. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, from before I was born. My mother and father, young and laughing, their wedding day, holidays together. They looked happy. There's more, Dylan said, pointing to an envelope at the bottom. The envelope contained medical records, psychiatric evaluations, prescriptions, all with my mother's name. Postpartum depression, I read aloud, severe anxiety disorder, paranoid tendencies. My hands shook as I turned the pages. These are dated from right after I was born. Keep reading, Dylan urged gently. Treatment recommendations, therapy sessions, medications prescribed but never taken. A pattern emerged, my mother repeatedly refusing help, convinced everyone was against her. She was sick, I whispered. All this time. Willow. My father's voice made me jump. He stood in the doorway looking uncertain. Dylan called me. I thought you should hear this part from me. I gestured to the medical records. Did you know? He entered the studio slowly, like he was approaching a wounded animal. I tried to get her help. That's what really caused our separation. Not work, not another woman. She became convinced I was trying to prove she was an unfit mother. But you never told me. How could I? He ran a hand through his grey hair. You were 12 when she won custody. Telling you your mother was mentally ill would have only made things worse. Dylan quietly moved to his easel, giving us space while pretending to paint. The control, the manipulation, I said, pieces falling into place. It was all because she was sick. Part of it, my father nodded, but being sick doesn't excuse what she did to you. She refused treatment, refused help. That was her choice. I picked up a photo of the three of us. Christmas morning, me probably around 2 years old. We looked like a normal, happy family. She's getting worse, my father said softly. The calls to board members, showing up everywhere, trying to destroy what you've built. She's spiraling. What am I supposed to do with this? I asked, my voice cracking. How am I supposed to hate her now? You don't have to hate her, Dylan spoke up from his easel. But you don't have to forgive her either. My father stepped closer. There's something else you should know. The company's mental health program. I implemented it last week. Full coverage, complete confidentiality. If she ever decides to get help. You did that for her? I did it for everyone, he corrected. But yes, I made sure it would cover family members of employees. A knock at the studio door made us all turn. Zoe stood there, slightly out of breath. Your mother's at the office again. She's demanding to see both of you. No, I said firmly. Not like this. Not on her terms. My father nodded. What do you want to do? I looked at the medical records, then at the happy family photos. I want to do this right. Zoe, call Milena. Tell her to set up a meeting, neutral ground, with a counselor present. Already done, Zoe smiled. Milena suggested the company's new mental health center. Tomorrow morning. I turned to my father. Will you be there? If you want me to be. I do. I gathered the medical records and photos, putting them back in the shoebox. But first, I need you to tell me everything. No more secrets, no more protected truths. I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Dylan cleared his throat. I'll make coffee. Looks like it's going to be a long night. As Dylan and Zoe moved around the studio, giving us space while staying close for support, my father and I sat down to talk. Really talk, for the first time in 20 years. Start from the beginning, I said. Tell me about the woman in these photos. Tell me about the mother I never knew. He picked up the wedding photo, touching my mother's smiling face gently. She was brilliant, beautiful, and so full of life. And then something broke, and she couldn't admit it needed fixing. Outside, the sun had set completely, but Dylan's studio lights created a warm, safe bubble around us. As my father began to tell our family's true story, I realized that understanding didn't mean forgiving, and knowing the reasons didn't erase the pain. But maybe, just maybe, it was a start towards something better, or at least something honest. The mental health center's family counseling room felt too bright, too sterile. My mother sat across from me, her perfect posture and manicured nails at odds with her red-rimmed eyes. My father sat between us, a physical buffer in this emotional minefield. Dr. Sarah, the counselor, spoke first. Thank you all for coming. Shall we begin? This is ridiculous, my mother said, but her voice lacked its usual bite. We don't need a stranger involved in family matters. Family matters? I couldn't help but laugh. Like when you involved the entire board in your campaign to discredit me. I was protecting you. Mrs. Bryant, Dr. Sarah interjected calmly, why don't you explain what protection means to you? My mother's hands trembled as she reached for her purse, pulling out a familiar photograph, the same Christmas morning shot I'd seen in the shoebox. Look at us, she said softly. We were happy, Perfect. Then he started working late, missing dinners, prioritizing his career. I was working late because you were becoming unstable. My father cut in. The medical bills. I wasn't unstable, she snapped. You just wanted everyone to think I was. Mother, I leaned forward, pushing the medical records across the table. It's all here. The diagnoses, the refused treatments. You needed help. Help? She laughed that hollow laugh I knew so well. I needed my husband to choose his family. I needed my daughter to follow the path I knew would keep her safe. Safe from what? I demanded. From ending up like him. She pointed at my father. Consumed by work, missing life, losing everything that matters. Dr. Sarah spoke again. Tiffany, it sounds like you're describing your own fears, not Willow's reality. You don't understand, my mother whispered. None of you understand. Then help us understand, I said. Help me understand why you returned every letter, every gift. Why you told me he abandoned us when he was fighting to be in my life. Because he would have taken you away. Tears spilled down her cheeks, smearing her perfect makeup. Just like he tried to take you when you were little, claiming I was unfit, trying to force me into therapy, into taking pills that would make me into someone else. My father's voice was gentle. The pills would have helped you, Tiffany. The therapy would have given you tools to cope. I didn't need tools, she shouted. I needed control. Don't you see? Everything was spinning, falling apart. Control was the only thing keeping me sane. And now, Dr. Sarah asked, what's keeping you sane now? My mother looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. Nothing, she whispered. I've lost control of everything. My daughter hates me. My ex-husband is her boss. All my careful plans. I don't hate you, I said quietly. I hate what you did. I hate the lies, the manipulation, the way you made me doubt myself. But I don't hate you. Willow. She reached for my hand, but I pulled back. No, Mother. Listen to me. I'm not that scared little girl anymore. I'm not your puppet or your project or your second chance. I'm an engineer, a board member, and a grown woman who's done letting you control her life. But I'm your mother. Yes, you are, and you're sick. You have been for a long time. But being sick isn't an excuse anymore. My father cleared his throat. The company's health plan, Tiffany. Full coverage for mental health services. No questions asked, complete confidentiality. She stared at him. You did that for me? For everyone, he said. But yes, with you in mind. Dr. Sarah leaned forward. Tiffany, accepting help isn't losing control. Sometimes it's the strongest form of taking control. My mother's hands shook as she picked up the medical records. And if I get help, what then? Then we take it one day at a time, I said. No promises, no guarantees, just honest efforts and real change. I don't know how to be any other way, she admitted. That's what therapy is for, Dr. Sarah said gently. Shall we schedule your first individual session? My mother looked at me, then at my father, then back at the Christmas photo in her hands. Will you? She swallowed hard. Will you come with me? Just the first time? I exchanged glances with my father. He nodded slightly. Yes, I said. We'll come. But after that, you have to do the work yourself. She nodded, tears flowing freely now. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know it's not enough, but I am sorry. I know, I replied, standing up. But sorry isn't what I need from you right now. I need you to get help, real help. As we left the counseling room, my father squeezed my shoulder. You did good, kiddo. We'll see, I said, watching my mother schedule her first therapy appointment with trembling fingers. We'll see. The Sustainable Energy Project launch party felt different from my promotion celebration. No flying champagne glasses, no dramatic scenes, just genuine achievement and quiet pride. I stood at the podium, looking out at the faces before me. When we started this project, I began, many said it couldn't be done, that the power output ratios were impossible to balance, that the cost would outweigh the benefits. I paused, finding Zoe's encouraging smile in the crowd. They were wrong. The presentation screen behind me showed the final numbers. Millions in savings, unprecedented efficiency ratings, and most importantly, a significant reduction in environmental impact. But this success isn't just about numbers, I continued. It's about people, about trust, collaboration, and believing in something bigger than ourselves. My father sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Next to him, in a simple black dress that would have seemed plain by her old standards, sat my mother. 3 months of intensive therapy had softened her edges, though her hands still fidgeted with nervous energy. I'd like to thank my team, especially Zoe, who never lost faith. I took a deep breath. And my family, who taught me that sometimes the hardest engineering problems aren't technical at all, they're human. After the applause and congratulations, I found Dylan by the refreshment table sketching on a napkin. "Still working on that portrait?" I asked, peeking at his drawing. "Almost done." He showed me the nearly completed canvas on his phone, my presentation moment captured in oils and emotion. "Though your mother keeps asking me to make her look younger," I laughed. "Some things never change." "But some things do," he said, nodding toward where my parents stood, actually having a civil conversation with Edwin and Milena. "Willow," my mother's voice called out, lacking its former sharp command. "Come here, darling. Edwin was just telling us about your first interview." I approached cautiously, still not entirely trusting these moments of normalcy. "I was saying," Edwin continued, "how you showed up with that prototype you'd built in your garage, determined to prove yourself on merit alone." "She gets that from me," my father said proudly. My mother tensed slightly, but then did something that surprised me. She laughed. "Actually, that determination is all her own. We just had to learn to stop standing in her way." "Speaking of not standing in the way," Milena interjected smoothly, "the board was very impressed with the project results, Willow. There's talk of expanding it globally." "Really?" I turned to my father. "You didn't mention that." He shrugged. "Wanted it to be a surprise. Though you'll have to travel for the implementations." I waited for my mother's reaction. The old her would have protested, tried to control the situation. Instead, she touched my arm gently. "When do you leave?" she asked quietly. "Not for a few months," I replied. "Still lots of planning to do." "Good." She straightened my jacket collar. A familiar gesture, but without the usual criticism. "That gives me time to work on, being okay with not being in control." "How's that going?" I asked carefully. "Dr. Sarah says I'm making progress." She smiled wryly. "Though I still hate those group therapy sessions." "But you're going," my father pointed out. "Yes, well..." She glanced at me. "Some things are worth the discomfort." Zoe appeared with champagne flutes, real ones this time, not the crystals my mother used to prefer. "Toast to the project lead." As everyone raised their glasses, I looked around at this unlikely gathering. My father, back in my life and proving to be the mentor I'd always needed. My mother, fighting her demons one therapy session at a time. Dylan capturing our story in art. Zoe, my unwavering support. Edwin, Milena, family chosen rather than born to. "Actually," I said, raising my glass, "I'd like to toast to something else. To engineering problems of all kinds, technical and emotional. To solutions that require more than calculations. And to the courage to rebuild what's broken, even when the blueprints aren't clear." "To courage," my mother echoed softly, her hand finding mine. Later, as the party wound down, I found myself alone with my father in my office, looking at the city lights below. "You know," he said, "I always dreamed of working with you like this. I just never imagined that it would take 20 years and a corporate crisis." He chuckled. "That you would exceed every dream I had for you." My mother's voice came from the doorway. She exceeded both our dreams, even the misguided ones. We stood there, the three of us, not quite healed but no longer broken. Not quite a normal family, but maybe something better, a work in progress, with all of us holding the tools to build something new. "Ready to go home?" Dylan asked, appearing with his portfolio and my coat. I looked at my parents, at my office, at the life I'd built despite and because of everything. Yes, I said, feeling the truth of it deep in my bones. I'm ready.